Welcome to What's the Matter, the pod and videocast where we talk about anything and everything with a psychology twist. Our content isn't going to be super heavy and technical, but my dad and I want to provide you with useful conversation that's going to help improve your thinking. If you want to stay up to date with everything we're going to be talking about, then remember to like and subscribe. Thanks guys, and I hope you enjoy the episode.
Good morning everyone, welcome to episode 3 of What's the Matter. I'm Em Drake and I'm joined by my fabulous co-host Gavin Drake, more formally known to his fans as Mr. Dad.
Yeah. I've even had some clients, Emily, referencing the Mr. Dad thing of late. So it seems to be catching on a bit.
I know, I've had people say to me on Instagram, like, Mr. Dad was great. I just have to let people know. I don't actually call you that normally, but
no, you don't. But isn't it interesting how things start? Because that was weren't planning that, and I think you just happened to mention Mr. Dad.
I think it just slipped out by accident.
Yeah, sort of, it's sticking. Yeah.
It is sticking. But How are you this morning?
Yeah, really good, thank you. Yeah, really, really good. In Norfolk, the sun is shining and the countryside's looking beautiful. Yeah,
it's same here in Essex. Mm-hmm. As you can probably see, I've tried to up my plant game this week because I've been jealous of your background.
Yeah. Well, obviously there's a nice plant on top of the office cupboard over there, and if you can see the plant on the windowsill or not, or whether the microphone's in the way, but you've got some greenery. Yeah.
I'm gonna have to up my game again next week. We'll have a tree behind me or something.
Yeah. No, well, look, your shelves are well stocked, Em.
I know. See if I keep them alive. That's the next question. But okay, so obviously last few podcasts we've talked around conscious thinking and focus and how you can make sort of, immediate changes to the way that you're dealing with situations or thinking about them. But today we're going to touch on the subconscious, aren't we? And that is huge, absolutely huge. And that's sort of running what we do, isn't it, on a day-to-day, the subconscious? So
yeah, I think we obviously we've referenced thinking and focus as you've said, and I think feedback has been on the podcast that people are getting that and the importance of that. But as you just suggested, the subconscious is pretty much running our lives. Yeah,
and the subconscious is a byproduct of what we're consciously doing on a day-to-day basis, isn't it? It's sort of we can train our subconscious to be doing whatever we give it, the more that's going to give back to us. So if we're giving it positivity, then we're going to get positivity. If we're giving it negativity, we're going to get negativity. So yeah, before we dive into this ginormous subject, I think, as I always say, you so eloquently put descriptions and stuff. I would like you to just give a little your description, your summary of what the subconscious is for all the people that are listening.
Okay, to give you a sort of a visual representation of that, and this is an analogy that's often drawn to explain things. But if you imagine an iceberg, the bit of the iceberg that one can see above the sea level or the water level is very small compared to the bit of the iceberg that's sitting below the water level. Yeah. And the bit you can see is the bit that you're aware of, sort of. That we could say is the conscious mind, and the conscious mind is absolutely tiny. And again, one of the other ways we explain this sometimes is pretty much at any one moment in time, you can only have really one conscious point of focus. So for me at the minute, my tiny conscious mind is sort of looking at you and formulating the words. So that's my very simple focus consciously at the minute. That's what my conscious mind is doing in simple terms. But sitting behind that is this massive storehouse of a subconscious. That's like the iceberg underneath the water, which is doing shed loads of stuff at any one time. Yeah, I think that's the tiny conscious mind, but that's the bit which we can be more aware of. Yeah. But actually, it would be useful to be more aware of what is sitting in our subconscious, because it is driving an incredible amount of what we do every single day. And there's a variety of numbers that get put on this. For many years in my own,
you mean?
Yeah. Well, in my learning, I've come across quite a lot from reliable sources around how much is the subconscious responsible for what we do. Yeah. And I've come across quite a lot of like high 90s percentages. So
yeah, I've seen a lot of that.
yeah, so 90, 95%, even 98% of what we do on an average day is driven by the subconscious, which that's huge.
That is absolutely huge.
I came across some more research, I think it was last year actually, that came out of Harvard,
Yeah.
America, and I think there's some research there that said it was 55%. So, whether it's 55%, 70%, or 90%, it's a big percentage of what we're doing every day. We aren't even that aware why we're doing stuff. It's just coming subconscious repeatedly.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's like, just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not real,
Yeah.
Just like Santa.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And the iceberg.
And the iceberg. Exactly. So the subconscious is absolutely huge, and that is what's driving us. But we can be more conscious of what we're putting into that. So you said to me earlier, before we sort of jumped on here, that whatever the conscious feeds the subconscious, it won't question. Didn't you? So if you are, well, we likened it to a sponge, didn't we? So a sponge, if you put that in a bucket of any liquid, whether that's water, wine, whatever, it's going to soak it up. It doesn't really matter what it is, it's just going to take it. So that's like the subconscious. Whatever you're feeding it, it's going to just take it all. And so we obviously want to talk about the consequences of what we've touched on in previous podcasts. So shifting our focus into more positive direction. So before we get into habit forming and that kind of thing, you've got a brilliant example around driving that I think people might just, I know that it's a really sort of, it is a sciencey topic, but we don't want that to be like that. We want people to listen to this and be like, okay, I get my head a little bit more now. Like, so, would you be okay to just explain that?
So just reiterating, tiny conscious, massive subconscious. Whatever we do with the conscious, the subconscious accepts.
Yeah.
Good, bad, helpful,
So whether it's the wine or the water with the sponge, just accept.
It will just take it on. The subconscious never questions the conscious. It just accepts what the conscious gives it, so to speak.
Yeah.
So I think the one way we can understand even more deeply just how the subconscious is running what we do most days, the majority of what we're doing most days, is the driving analogy. So I can recall a long time ago when I started my driving lessons at the tender age of 17. If I'm honest, at the time, quite a cocky teenager, and the driving thing, couldn't wait to do it. In my teenage years, old people drive, so it must be easy. So I'm just going to nail this, and then the world is my oyster.
You obviously didn't look at how Grandad drove very well.
No,
he certainly didn't. He didn't follow the rules.
But I got a very rude awakening on my first few driving lessons, because I'm sure everyone will relate to this. Every little tiny thing my driving instructor was telling me to do, I was needing to consciously do.
Yeah.
My tiny conscious mind is shifting quite rapidly based on his instruction, from engaging the clutch, putting it in gear, slowly raising the clutch, slowly depressing the accelerator, flicking the indicator, looking over oh wow, at the end of a 45-minute or hour's driving lesson, I got dropped back off home again, and you're sweating, your hurts, your brain hurts, you've needed to concentrate that tiny conscious mind on every tiny little thing you're doing. Now, obviously what happens is the more driving lessons you have, and then hopefully you pass your test and you go out and you drive in the big wide world, the more you use those neural pathways that have been constructed through what you consciously started to learn to do. And the more you use those neural pathways, the stronger they get, the more easily you slip into them and access them. So it becomes a subconscious thing.
Yeah.
And we get to this weird experience that we all have, those people that drive, is you can drive for 5, 10, 15 minutes or half an hour or even longer sometimes, and consciously think to yourself, how on earth did I get here?
Yeah, you don't even think about you don't even think about driving. Yeah.
And it's just one example of habit forming.
Yeah.
And something we started to do consciously, we repeated quite a few times. The brain physically changed structure, neurons fired, neural pathways were created, but that was conscious initially. Then the more we travel those neural pathways, the more we use them. So the more we drive, the stronger they get. And it's a bit like, this isn't exactly what happened. This is a bit like the conscious mind keeps showing the subconscious what to do. And after a while, the subconscious says to the conscious, thank you for teaching us. We'll do that now. We'll take over that activity. You go and do something else. Yeah. So that's how, I can now drive, I don't know, from Norfolk to Hull or Norfolk to Manchester or wherever, 3 or 4 hours. And actually, it's quite scary quite a lot of the time. I'm not even consciously thinking about what I'm doing.
I know.
So often. So driving is a lovely example to illustrate the point, but it's not just limited to driving. If people just think about the multitude of habits they engage in every single day, that's mental, emotional, and behavioral habits. They just repeat. One other example that most people will get, is if you take a typical working day, people's routine in the morning.
Yeah.
Unless they're on shift systems and stuff, but most people, they put their alarm on for the same time every day. The order that they do things in terms of getting ready in the morning before they take the bus or drive to work or whatever, pretty much the order they do things stays the same every day.
Yeah.
Because not consciously thinking about it, they've done it so often, the subconscious just runs that program in the background. And that's just driving, morning routines, etc., full of habits.
Yeah.
Some help us, some really don't help us.
Yeah, definitely. It's so funny, just when you're telling that story about learning to drive, I just feel like a suppressed memory of mine has just come up from my first driving lesson. I remember, like you were saying, when you have that one conscious, you can't really have more than one conscious thought at any time. And I remember I learned to drive in November and it was really dark. I'd learned after I'd been in like a whole day in sixth form, and trying to think, okay, my hands need to be at, 10 and 2. Got to think about this, got to think about that. And my shoulders must have been up by my chin. I was quite,
tense and
I was quite tense as I was doing it. But I remember thinking I'd finally got there. I was on a little housing estate, thinking, okay, this is all right. And I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I wasn't born natural when I first started learning, but I sort of thought, yeah, I'm doing this. And my instructor said, just stop the car and just look at me. And I stopped the car and I looked at her, and she was about a whole foot higher than me. And she said, you've just been driving half on the path, half on the road. And I had no awareness that the car was like diagonal, because I was just so fixated on my hands on the wheel and driving in I was like, I needed a lot of lessons.
You've not hit any pedestrians, hopefully.
I didn't hit any pedestrians. Well,
right, good.
I wasn't consciously focusing on it, but
we could have had some feedback from listeners and watchers that actually, Emily's reckless driving on the pavement. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I'd swear nobody was harmed in my first driving lesson, or any of them. But no, you're totally right. The habits we're forming them all the time, and those things, it's not even just driving, it could be learning new software at work, it could be learning any new skill, learning piano, learning a language. And after a while that becomes second nature. But
the fascinating thing is, that's amazing. As a species, that's amazing, isn't it? Because if we think about the multitudes of things that we need to do to sort of stay alive and function in day-to-day life, we can't handle all those things consciously.
No, I know.
No way we can handle. So the way the whole brain and mind works is amazing. So we need this massive subconscious to sort of run things in the background. So you want to breathe. Most people have to consciously think about walking. They just walk or run or write. Because the more you've done things, the more it's passed over from the conscious to the subconscious. The conscious has trained the subconscious, and it becomes how you do and how you do it. But that isn't just about breathing and your heart beating and walking and driving and getting ready for work in the morning. Those are sort of behavioral habits, but they're all supported by emotional habits, aren't they? So the more somebody wakes up on a Monday morning and says to themselves consciously, I hate Mondays, my life sucks, that weather's terrible, the more they do that on a Monday, after a while, if they repeat that on enough Mondays, the subconscious will just take over
and tell them they hate Mondays.
And they'll wake up on Mondays miserable, but they don't really know why they're miserable. It's because the conscious has trained the subconscious. That's what happens on a Monday, so just do it.
It's the same with so many things, like confidence and self-esteem, and so many people aren't aware of when they say to themselves over and over again, oh, I'm so bad at this, or I just have no confidence, or I'm just an angry person, or I get really hot-headed. The more you tell yourself that over and over and over again, like you're saying, you are it's self-fulfilling, because that's what you're teaching yourself. So and I guess that's the good news, is we do actually have the ability to take control of our subconscious. But you can't just try and think positively once and be cured of any anger problems, or it's like you can't go to the gym once and get a six pack. You know what I mean? You have to continue. You have to work on this.
Yeah.
You're aware of this. I'm aware of this. But so what would you? I'm sort of thinking. Yeah, what would you say to somebody who, what advice would you give to somebody to positively improve their subconscious? We want people to listen to this and be able to take away some positives. So what advice would you give to somebody?
Well, I think I don't always like using this analogy, but I think it's an analogy that most people understand. When you liken the brain to a computer, but I don't like it, but it's one that people get, if that makes sense. So if you think about your subconscious as like, almost like this big processing unit you've got in your head, obviously we are born with some wiring and programming, to be with survival. There'll be a little bit of genetic stuff in there from your parents, etc., etc. But if you think about the whole nature nurture,
I know I was about to say you're opening a can of worms here. Nature versus
nurture. There's lots of disagreement on the nature nurture debate, but generally I think the majority of psychologists and others agree in the field that actually there is nature, there is nurture.
Yeah.
And actually the nurture capacity is significantly greater than the nature capacity, if that makes sense. We are born with some stuff, but I've worked with enough people over 22 years to know that actually we can sometimes write new programs for things in here, if that makes sense. So I think one of the things you and I wanted to try and get across on this podcast is the hugeness of the subconscious, the massive impact it has on daily life based on how it's programmed. And there's lots of influenced programming from the world around us into our subconscious, but there's also, what are we doing? How are we programming our own subconscious? And the more rubbish that we put in, the more negative, destructive, unhelpful thinking, psychology, mindsets, the more we keep repeating that stuff consciously, the more we'll end up repeating it endlessly from the subconscious.
Yeah.
So I think getting that point across is really helpful for today around the relationship between the conscious and the subconscious and what the subconscious goes on to do, those habits every single day. There are multitudes of things we can be doing to reprogram or program better the subconscious. And again, I know we keep teasing people on the podcast by saying, we're going to talk about it on another podcast. We have got so much to share with everybody, but when we and some subject matter that we'll be looking at is like the inner voice, or voices sometimes. So we'll be having whole podcasts and more on the inner voice and the inner voices, how we visualize, how we imagine, mentally project stuff, the communication we have with ourselves, the communication we have with others. So as soon as something comes out of here, so we're telling someone else, everything we tell everyone else, who are we also telling? Ourselves. So we need to be thinking about that stuff. How can we get more consciously aware of we've already discussed, of our general thoughts and our general focus in daily life? How much responsibility do we take for ourselves? How clear are we about the futures we want to create? All of this stuff's going on in our head, and all of that moves from the conscious to the subconscious if we engage in it often enough. But the fascinating thing is, as you said a little while ago, it isn't about one day thinking, okay, today I'm going to think constructively and then everything will be fine. There's a lot of debate and research again about habit forming, and I've been asked so many times in my life around behavioral habits, but remember they come from emotion and thinking habits. So no behavioral habit exists on its own. It comes from emotions and thought, repetition of thought. How long does it take to create a new habit? And so how long does it take to create some new programming, if that makes sense? And there's lots of thought around this. 21 days was very common. If you repeat something often enough, 21 days.
I think
28 days.
I
Again, I think it was in the last 2 years I came across some more recent research which said at least 60. But if you want to develop a new daily habit, mentally, emotionally, and behaviorally, so hopefully a more helpful one, if you repeat it pretty much every day for 60 days, it then starts to move from the conscious to the subconscious, starts to really get in there. So answering your question about what's some of the things we can do, there are so many things, and we're going to be covering.
I know.
I think initially, based on the fact this is only the third podcast, and we've talked about thoughts, general thoughts, general conscious focus, is to link today's subconscious content to stuff we've done already and say, okay, just start to, the phrase I use is start to stand guard on the door of your own mind, if that makes sense. Be more aware, reflect a few times a day around what you're doing mentally, and then obviously what you're doing emotionally and behaviorally as a consequence of what you're doing. basically, and start to. We often, you'll know this. There's an early reflection exercise we often encourage people to do. So again, and this would be a really early bit of awareness and your brain, trying to get your brain to consciously work it out, and then you can use lots of other tools on top of it. But I encourage people, if mentally, emotionally, behaviorally, they aren't in the best place. So first, you need to be aware of that.
Yeah.
Then more aware of, is that just a conscious thing that's happened now, or is that a subconscious thing I've been repeating? Has that become a habit?
Yeah.
First thing, it's a 5-step reflection exercise. First thing to do is sit down and write down or capture the situation or the circumstance that you're in. So what is it that you're not responding particularly well to? So do that. Then think about and write down how you're feeling. So it could be a word, or it could be a few words that illustrate or encapsulate how you are feeling at the minute.
Yeah.
That could be stressed, it could be anxious, it could be, but it's a way that's not very helpful.
Yeah.
Then go behind the feelings and think, so, okay, well, if I'm feeling like that in this situation, what are the thoughts I'm having, or what is it in my subconscious that's programmed, that's causing me to feel that way? So it's a way of thinking, or it's a perception, or the meaning that you give it.
Yeah.
So that reflection exercise allows you to identify the situation, how you're feeling, and probably how you're thinking, consciously or unconsciously. Then, okay, ask yourself, if I'm in this when I'm in this situation again in the future, how would I ideally like to be feeling?
Yeah.
Could be you want to be more confident, or it could be you want to be feeling happier, or it could be you want to be more joyous, or whatever. And okay, if I want to feel like that in the future in this type of situation, what thoughts do I need to be having that would enable me to do so? Now, the more you repeat that reflection exercise, the more you start to get a grip and an understanding and an awareness of what's going on in your head.
I love that exercise. I think that was a very real example I can give of this. This is before I moved into doing this stuff with you and working with you, but so sort of when I was becoming more conscious of my thinking and stuff. And this is an example. I mean, you can apply this exercise to anything, but for me, and one example that's probably quite real for a lot of people is being late. So when I used to go into London for work, and the trains are quite unreliable, and they're quite unreliable. I think anyone that lives around Essex might know that sometimes the TfL into London's a bit unreliable. But the train would be cancelled or it'd be delayed, and to be honest, I was already cutting it a bit fine. So I'd be getting late. So step one, obviously, train's delayed. That was what the situation was. Train's delayed. I was going to be late for work, so I'd be my step two. My feelings were, I was a bit anxious. I was a bit feeling stressed. I was feeling out of control, and just I didn't like that. I would get I'd be a bit sweaty. I'd be a bit like. I didn't turn up to work looking the best, to be honest, a bit shiny. But I'd be feeling that my sort of feelings were stressed, uncomfortable. And step 3 from that, the thoughts I was having was, I'm going to be late for work. My team's going to be disappointed in me. I'm going to be, you start visualizing the bad things I used to start visualizing bad things that were going to happen that day. So when I was doing that all the time, I would turn up to work. I'd have run there, like from Liverpool Street. So I'd be feeling not very nice when I got to work. I was thinking my team were going to be having all these thoughts around me, and that I would be late, and Emily's late again. And felt uncomfortable. Just didn't like it. Wasn't in the best headspace. And then I'd just be a bit sort of angst at my desk. And when I became more conscious of having these thoughts, and sometimes, I was late through my own fault. But when it was the train's fault, I used to go through this exercise and think, so I've obviously gone through those first 3 steps. Step 4, how do I want to feel about this in the future? Well, I'd like to feel quite calm. It's out of my control, really, if the trains are delayed. And I'd like to turn up to work, not being fazed by the fact that I am 5 minutes late, or 5 minutes late doesn't have to impact the rest of my working day, but I used to let it.
Yeah.
And so then I just think, okay, what do I need to do to have these thoughts? Well, I just calmly used to tell my boss if I was going to be late, like, really sorry, tell her as soon as I can. And then because that rest is out of my control, all I can do is just sit on the train and wait to get there. I would just kind of accept that was the situation and more positively focus my time. Like, me stressing on the train that I'm going to be late for 40 minutes does nothing to me other than I would feel very unrelaxed. I would
Yeah, and I wouldn't be in the best headspace. So I think a lot of people can probably relate about being late
Yeah,
or
yeah,
things that
definitely.
are out of their control, but you can apply this situation to anything, and that, you know, that 5-step reflective exercise to anything. You can apply it to relationships, to, you know, problems at work, or
Yeah.
anything really. It's very applicable. So it's something that I totally agree with you will really help people to be consciously aware of their thoughts and getting it down on paper.
But the fascinating thing is, before you reflected with those 5 steps, that was becoming a pattern,
Yeah, it was.
a habit or a pattern, in as much as sometimes I bet you would be going to the station and already winding yourself up
Yeah, I was.
with an expectation of the unreliability of the trains. And as you said, when you got to work, you were highly stressed. Were you in the best state to perform highly in your job? Of course not.
No, not at all.
And sometimes you could let that affect your whole day. Sometimes that then, the more you do that in the mornings, the more that becomes, you start feeling anxious and uptight in the mornings because is the train going to be late? So the more you're repeating it, it's becoming, going from the conscious to the subconscious, and you can actually end up just being anxious most mornings and not even really knowing why.
Yeah.
But the great thing is, you were aware of that, you reflected with those 5 steps, and you start to then consciously create different thinking around the same situation.
Yeah, no, definitely.
And then so different thinking, different feelings, and then you can start to embed as a habit in the subconscious. Whenever the train's late, you're just generally pretty calm.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's just repetition.
Repetition is the mother of learning.
The mother of learning. And the more you repeat something, the more it'll move from the conscious to the subconscious. So I always say to people, please, please, please make sure you're repeating good stuff.
Yeah.
Healthy stuff, how you want to be in the world. Because if you repeat often enough, the fantastic news is, after a while, you don't need to consciously think about it because you've programmed your subconscious and that's how you are.
Yeah,
I know people who are habitually happy.
Yeah.
I know people who are habitually miserable, and loads of other variations in between. And it's often not about their life circumstances.
No, it's
about how they are with their life circumstances and what's become a habit, and how they've programmed their subconscious.
Yeah, definitely. It's self-fulfilling, isn't it? Like Absolutely. You say, the more we're doing something, the more we will be doing something. I think that's been really, really useful. So would you be able to just, for everyone listening, just give a take-home message, a bit of a recap on what we've talked about before we say goodbye to our lovely listeners?
Again, this goes very quickly.
I know, it does.
Yeah, I think there's like two or a few things we really wanted to try and get across with today's podcast. We'd actually had quite a lot of people asking about the subconscious.
Oh yeah, so, quite a lot of people have said about this.
Keep those requests coming if there's key things you want us to talk about. Firstly, just getting reinforcing for everybody the tiny conscious and the massive subconscious.
Mm-hmm.
The fact the subconscious is pretty much in the background running us in day-to-day life.
Yeah.
And the sort of programmable nature of the subconscious, and the input that we have is really from the conscious. So let's stand guard on the door of our own mind, be more aware of what we're doing consciously.
Mm-hmm.
We want to be putting healthy stuff in.
Yeah.
The conscious wants to invest healthily in the subconscious. So more constructive, more useful, helpful thinking based on the lives we want to create for ourselves. Excuse me. So with some self-awareness, we might sort of start to think, actually, I need to reprogram a bit of my subconscious because I need to create a different habit or a new way of reacting and responding to something. And a helpful tool to start that process, because there's loads of tools we hopefully will share over time, is that I always call it that 5-point reflection exercise. Yeah. So if ever you're in a time or a place where it's not working out, or you're not in the best place, or you realize you are miserable most mornings, or whatever, is actually just, okay, log the situation, log how you're feeling, log probably what you're thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Then say, okay, in that situation in the future, how would I rather be feeling? So therefore, how do I need to be thinking?
Yeah.
And going through that process doesn't mean immediately you'll snap into that thinking. But the fact is, you are constructing what you want it to look like in your brain. So then should be more easy for you to start to practice that. But don't just do it for a day.
Yeah.
At least 60 days, every day for at least 60 days, or on a regular basis. That's how you start to get programming into the subconscious.
No, definitely. No, thank you, Dad. I think you've explained it very well, and hopefully it's been useful to anyone listening, because as you say, we had quite a few requests about doing something on this, because we teased it in the last couple of episodes. Didn't we?
Yeah, we did. We're such a tease.
I know. We're giving the people what they want.
Indeed.
Fabulous. Okay, well, me and you are going to be back again in 2 weeks, aren't we? And
Yep.
well, I get to see you tomorrow, so
Yeah, you're coming
Why
up to Norfolk. Looking
stick
forward
the
to
kettle
that. Yeah, we'll get the kettle on, and
Yeah.
and for everybody out there, just get programming your subconscious in a productive, positive way.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, awesome.
Thanks, Em.
Well, thank you everyone for listening, and thank you, Dad.
Yeah, thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to the latest episode of What's the Matter. My dad and I are going to be back again in another 2 weeks. If you haven't subscribed yet but you want to stay up to date with what we're talking about, then please remember to do so. And in the meantime, have a good rest of your week.